Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce you to my longtime friend, Ben Horowitz, who is a co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, one of the premier venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Ben, do you remember how we met?
I do remember how we met. Yeah, I was a kid at the time. I think I was 20 years old. And my father somehow got a connection to Ed McCracken, who was the CEO of Silicon Graphics. And Ed McCracken, of course, wasn't going to deal with somebody looking for a summer internship. So he kicked me to Ken. And for whatever reason, Ken actually called me, which was a generous thing of him to do at the time, given the size of his organization. And kind of long story short, I got the job, and then Ken has been essentially my mentor for the last 35 years.
So Ben, you've always had this entrepreneurial spirit. Where did it come from?
That's a great question. I think, because I came from a family that was sort of politically oriented, much more than business oriented. But like one of the things that probably kind of rang true, at least kind of culturally, and how I grew up, was like, you have to think for yourself. You have to have your own ideas. And that kind of goes very well with entrepreneurship, because to be an entrepreneur, you have to you have to believe you're right, at least. You have to really believe in your own thinking and your own ideas, because if you're looking for somebody to give you the answer, you have no chance in that field. And so kind of coming from that world where, like, okay, rethink everything from first principles, I think that kind of had me in the mode of that, and then kind of made me feel like I wanted to do something. But a big part of it was my experience at Silicon Graphics. I just thought that, that was an environment I had never even dreamed was possible. Just the number of like incredibly smart people, how hard they work, the things that were getting created. I just thought that was, that was the best thing ever, create something like that out of nothing.
And your partner in Andreessen Horowitz, you met earlier and you worked together before. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship with you and Mark Andreessen?
Yeah, it's a funny relationship. So we met at a company called Netscape, which could have been considered like a Silicon Graphics spinoff. And Mark was the founder, and I got a job there as a product manager. He actually interviewed me. I don't think he remembers the interview that well, but I remember it very well. And I thought he was, an amazingly kind of insightful 22-year-old at the time. And, we started working together there. And, kind of my first like real incident with him came when we had, Microsoft was putting tremendous pressure on us. I was running a project called the web server, and our web server cost, I think it was $1,200 for the insecure version and $5,000 for the one with security. And Microsoft was coming out with their web server, and we got our hands on it, and it was 10 times faster and free. And so we were in a lot of trouble. So we spent months and months kind of building up this suite to take on back office. And it was our big kind of comeback, against Microsoft's existential threat to us. And we were supposed to launch the thing, I think, on the 1st of March. And then on, 2 weeks before then, Mark leaked the whole thing to Computer Reseller News, which wasn't, not the Wall Street Journal, Computer Reseller News. And so I sent him a note. I said, I guess, I was really mad. I said, I guess we're not going to wait for the launch. And he sent me back a super profane note copying, my boss and the CEO and everybody else, saying that, server product marketing, which was me, was causing the whole company to fail. And that was kind of our first like big interaction. I was pretty sure I was gonna get fired and all that kind of thing, but we figured it out, and yeah, we've been working together now 25 years.
So you then started a company called Loud Cloud at the time, I believe.
Yeah.
And what did you learn about entrepreneurship from the Loud Cloud experience that serves you well today?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I wrote a whole book on this, and this probably the thing that I'm best known for was that experience. Look, everything went wrong, and probably the biggest thing I learned is as everything was going wrong. So it was through the dot-com crash and, nearly going bankrupt and going public with, $2 million in trailing 12-month revenue and all those kinds of things. But the thing that, at the time that was so striking for me was, as I was feeling like I must be the worst CEO in the world because everything is going wrong and the company's melting down and so forth, I would talk to my friends who were also entrepreneurs and I would ask them how it was going with their business. They would, it's fantastic. It's amazing. It's the greatest experience. And I'm like, wow, I must be like so effing stupid that like my business is so bad. But of course they were all lying to me and they all went bankrupt. And so, what it taught me was like, one, everybody's company gets very screwed up when you try building a company is super hard and nobody does it cleanly. And that feeling though, you're definitely not the only one, even though nobody will talk to you about it. And so that's been a huge help for me as kind of a venture capitalist, is just understanding what the process is and understanding what it means to build a company. And how incompetent as a inventor founder you are going to be for a long time. It takes years to learn how to be a CEO and lots of mistakes. And a lot of what makes entrepreneurs succeed is kind of fighting through that feeling and continuing to improve, because it's no fun to suck at your job. And it's even less fun if that job has a whole company of people depending on you to be like good at it.
And so that was the kind of the message in the hard thing about hard things book. But if there's one or two takeaways that you want to give to the audience about that book, what is the one or two messages in your book?
I think my favorite message from that book is, look, it's going to be a struggle. And my grandfather was a communist, and on his grave he had this quote from Marx, which was, "Life is struggle." And I think that's entrepreneurship. That's what it is, and so you have to embrace it. You can't run from it. It's going to be super hard. It's going to be really, really difficult building. It always looks easy from the outside, and people, launch all kinds of crazy criticism about you once you succeed, if you succeed. But if you go back and any of these companies really, really, really struggle to make it. And if you don't run at that, if you run away from it, you're never going to make it because it's going to be there.
Okay. And then after being an entrepreneur, you decided to be a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
And you had a little different, I talked to you a number of times about this as you were starting, and you had a little bit of a different approach than most people had in the business. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking, you and Mark's thinking about that?
Yeah. No, it's funny because, at the time we spoke to a lot of VCs about it and they all thought it was a terrible idea, which my experience as an entrepreneur let me know I was on the right track then. Because if an idea is actually innovative, everybody thinks it's a bad idea. So if you have an idea for a business and everybody says that's a great idea, don't do it because it's not actually a breakthrough. It's too obvious. But our idea was basically this, that, the most successful companies in tech over the years had been run by their founders for a very long time, from IBM to Hewlett Packard, to Microsoft, to Oracle, to more recently things like Google or Facebook or Amazon. But venture capital was really not set up to help the inventor become the CEO. It was set up to replace the inventor with a professional CEO. And they really had nothing to kind of help you get through that journey, which was an incredibly difficult journey. And so we had the idea, it's like, well, what, if there was such a venture capital firm, what would it look like? And there were really two core elements to it. One was the network. So we felt like, and this is, one thing I learned from Ken, that, a huge gap between an inventor and a kind of professional, somebody who's done the CEO job before, is their network, who they know, executives you can hire, people who have capital that you can raise from, people in the press who you can get your story out to. All these things big customers that you can go talk to. You don't have any of that as an inventor. And building that network is just something that, it takes time. Nobody can build a network fast. So the first element that we did is we said, well, what if the firm basically systematized and professionalized and built a gigantic network under a kind of brand that all the CEOs in the portfolio could make use of. And so that, was kind of the big operating change that we had. And, today we have 180 people in the firm, which is, I'm sure we're the biggest kind of venture capital firm in terms of headcount, even though we're relatively young, because we have this immense network that we kind of have funded over the years. And then the second part was just skill sets. So, nobody can give you the CEO skill set, but if you have somebody who understands what it is, they can help you kind of attain it faster. And so all of the kind of original general partners were, people had experience being CEO and had some insight into that. And that was quite frankly why I wrote the book, because it was kind of like, wow, this is a big skill set. I kind of need to write this all down and put it out there. I didn't, it was funny because I wrote the book just for our portfolio, but it turned out to be much bigger, which is my biggest lesson in writing, I think, is write for the narrowest audience possible if you want to get to a broad audience. Because if you try and broaden the topics, it just gets too watered down and nobody can do anything with it.
So I was talking to you recently, and you mentioned that you thought the firm had improved over the years and it was stronger than ever. Can you give me a little insight to that?
Yeah, so, and we started off, not really knowing much about investing, I have to say. I mean, neither Mark nor I had ever been a professional investor when we started the firm. And, our original idea was kind of, I would say, partially very correct, which was we thought that with this differentiated offering, we would attract the best entrepreneurs and we could be very competitive at winning deals early, which is fundamentally important in venture capital because, look, not everybody gets access to all the deals. There are like 4 or 5 firms that have access to all the best deals and everybody else has to get what they can. And so getting into that top tier was critical. And so the firm differentiation idea really worked. But the other part of it is, okay, then once the deals come to you, like how good are you at picking them? And, look, for the first fund, Mark and I just sort of, whatever deal was the hot deal, we just said, okay, we'll just go win it. And that actually worked pretty good for the first fund. But as we expanded the general partners, like not everybody was me and Mark, and not everybody could win all those deals and so forth. And so, we kind of needed to get good at picking deals and having kind of stronger investment thesis and all these kinds of things. And so, I feel like in the last couple of years, we've really achieved that to a great degree.
Ben, you've noted in the industry to have a serious commitment for founders of color and underrepresented groups. Why?
Well, look, I mean, it's a lot of it comes from, something that I believe in, which is there's real talent out there that I think, I felt like a lot of other firms couldn't necessarily see. And if we could see it, then we could take advantage. And, we certainly have in kind of both with our own personnel and with our portfolio. We have, I think Chris Lyons is probably considered the single best relationship guy in all of venture capital now. And, we got him just because we could see him, even though he's in a different industry, he's, ended up being really, really great for us.
And you've talked often about the Black American impact on culture.
Yeah.
And that presented an opportunity. You talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, and, we're expanding our thinking on that. So the first opportunity that, that I thought was very, very clear and has paid off amazingly for us, by the way, and I'll get into that. It was, look, when I started Silicon Graphics, like tech companies didn't sell to consumers for the most part. Like we didn't sell those workstations to consumers. Those were sold to businesses, and most of products were sold to businesses. So the whole idea of consumer behavior and technology wasn't something that you really had to put together or be great at. But that all changed in the mid 2000s. And when you talk about, okay, how do you move consumer behavior, which is, maybe the kind of single most difficult idea in entrepreneurship, African Americans have just this really, really long history of being able to do that through, multiple genres of music that were invented, jazz, blues, rock and roll, hip hop, all invented by African Americans, all move culture, the associated fashion, dance, et cetera, all kind of coming from one group. So there just seemed like a great opportunity to create a partnership between kind of cultural leaders and tech leaders. And so that was the Cultural Leadership Fund. And it's been really amazing because you have, guys like Quincy Jones who speak 22 languages, but nobody here, if they just bumped into him on the street and didn't know who he was, would know that he was, as much of a genius as Mark Zuckerberg for sure, but just in a completely different package with a completely different way of thinking. And so we've been able to educate our entrepreneurs, by making those introductions on those things. And then it's helped us in that, we have a new investment, for example, in a company called Clubhouse, and that network has been amazing. We just did Felicia's got a show she just hosted with on the future of food with all these biotech entrepreneurs, plus KRS-One, who did the original kind of rap song on being a vegetarian called Beef. And you kind of can put those two together and you have a guy who knows how to move the culture very far with, a scientist who can invent a new thing. And that's kind of the whole manifestation of the Cultural Leadership Fund. I think there's an even bigger idea, which we just started a new fund called the TXO Fund. And the idea behind that is, like, if you look at venture capital in Silicon Valley is really, really good at funding technology ideas. And that's made it a tremendous business because technology is one of two things that the United States dominates in globally. Technology is one. I mean, China's the only real competitor, but America's super strong in technology. The other thing that we export and dominate even more than technology is culture. But like, what is the funding model for cultural ideas? And if you go back to kind of hip hop, which is a giant, like if you look at the full reach of hip hop from, everything it influences to, every product people buy, fashion, luxury items, music, et cetera, it's certainly as big as Amazon or anything in tech, but the original entrepreneurs of that genre, P. Diddy, Andre Harrell, Russell Simmons, they owned the original companies. They owned Def Jam and Uptown Records and Bad Boy Records, but they didn't retain ownership. And they didn't retain ownership of the ideas as it grew. And so the idea of the TXO fund is, okay, can we fund cultural entrepreneurs and give them not only, like, the capital, I think, is a small part, but the bigger part is the network, the knowledge of how to go global, the knowledge of kind of complex financing and how to go through the layers of capital.
So Ben, you mentioned culture and you just wrote a book on culture.
Yes.
If you take your book and what are the 2 or 3 big ideas in that book, the big takeaways that you would want readers of that book, especially entrepreneurs of the book, to take away?
Well, so right now, as you kind of mentioned, COVID, I think the biggest thing in this work from home model that's a real challenge is trust. Because, building trust over Zoom with new employees or into the culture is really a challenge. And probably one of my first lessons in kind of management was from you, Ken, where you always talked about the importance of communication. And as you become bigger as an organization, that becomes your number one challenge, like forever, not just like for the day or the week, but like that's going to be the thing that you're going to have to solve as a manager. And the foundation of communication, of course, is trust, because, if I trust you completely, you don't even have to talk to me because I know you're acting in my best interest. And if I don't trust you at all, you can talk to me all day and I'm not going to listen to words you say because I don't trust you. And so, in this time when trust is much more complicated to build, I think, putting the emphasis on how you do that remotely and over Zoom, and the one-on-one conversations that you have with people, and how you kind of can establish that your word is good and that what you're doing is fair, is really, really important. And I've seen, a lot of entrepreneurs run into this problem recently. I'd say, the second thing, which I think is a real opportunity right now is, one way you can set the culture is through stories. So like, what is the story of the culture of the organization? And because, everybody's having all hands every week now, because it's, a way to kind of get the company together and so forth. A real opportunity there is to tell the story of how the company enacted the culture in the way that you wanted it to. And, I've been telling stories about, talking CEOs on the right way to lay people off, and like how you have to have those conversations and so forth, just so people like in the firm know what's important to us. And then it's also a kind of an opportunity to put emphasis on the ideas that you have. So one of our cultural kind of values is we take a long view of relationships. And great, we're not taking a transactional view. What does that mean? Well, here's what it means, guys. Like, we're in COVID. We have all these corporate partners that aren't buying anything. So call them. Call them now when there's no reason for you to call other than you care about their business. We want to reach out and see how we can help. They may not be able to buy anything, but we can give them advice on how to optimize how they're working from home, how, what's coming down the pike on technology and so forth. So just, it's a good activity to do, but it's one that makes everybody go, wow, like we did that during COVID and that's who we are. So, ideas like that, I think at a time like this are important.
Given what's going on, Ben, in these uncertain times, what advice are you giving your companies?
Yeah, I mean, like the number one thing, when you're in a crisis is, watch your cash. Just because that's the one, I think Peter Drucker had a line, the one unforgivable sin in business is running out of cash. And you can recover anything else, but that one is very tricky. And because we're in the pandemic, the capital markets have actually been pretty good, but they can change at any point. And so that's, that remains the first thing. And I think the other thing is the thing that we just talked about, which is, you have to pay attention to your culture now because it's changing in ways that you don't understand. And then finally, employees are going through, whatever you're going through, your employees may be going through something worth just from a family standpoint, from a young children's standpoint, from a mental health standpoint. And so you really just have to pay extra attention to everyone working for you because, look, as a CEO, there are always situations where somebody gets divorced or somebody has an addiction problem or somebody has something happen where all of a sudden their performance goes south. Okay, that's going to be much more prevalent now. And so you have to have a deep understanding of what's going on with the people that work for you.
So what trends excite you, interest you, you think where you expect some breakthroughs to happen?
Well, I mean, probably the most relevant one right now is in biotech and computational biology. And we're kind of seeing that with the vaccine. So if you go back in time, I think the fastest vaccine developed before now was like the mumps vaccine, and it was 4 years, I believe. But, if you look at how the process for developing vaccines, it was, you grow like a flu vaccine out of chicken eggs and things like that. And so not only getting the vaccine was hard, now it was imprecise, and it was, very hard to manufacture. Now companies like Moderna are printing RNA, like literally, and it's a whole new world of kind of vaccines. And then the other equally exciting thing, kind of on the COVID front, is the antibody therapies, which hopefully they work. But if they do work, it could be literally a magic bullet where you get COVID and they give you a shot and you're better. So like just the fact that any of that stuff is possible is really remarkable. Also seeing similar innovations in testing, and I think there's going to be some very rapid COVID tests coming out soon that are highly accurate. And so all that is, I think, an indicator of how far we've come in biotech in very recent years. I mean, even since the Ebola outbreak. And so that, that's probably the most kind of relevant, interesting area. The other one that I think, that 2021 is probably going to be a really remarkable year for crypto. If you look at the projects that are coming out, how well distributed finance is working now, and then just the kind of need to have some mechanism for governing ourselves that's more advanced than what we've been doing. That's the other like really exciting area of technology.
Well, Ben, I could talk to you forever, as you know, and I find it very enjoying. I'm sure the audience also enjoy it. But our time's up here. Could you maybe give me and the audience a closing thought?
Yeah, well, I think that we're in like a very, interesting and different kind of moment here in terms of kind of culture and race relations and all these things. It's certainly a different kind of thing than I've been through in my lifetime. And I would just say, it's a moment. And the way that moment becomes like a real change is, at least in the business world, is we've got to get real successes. And so I think that the doors, people who, a year ago would have been cut off an opportunity because they were uncomfortable, are going to take the opposite approach and open a door because they'd be uncomfortable not opening it. And in the moment, you can walk through that door, but it's what happens when you get on the other side that's going to really change the industry or change business, much more so than getting the initial opportunity. So I think that's the thing that we all have to focus on, is how do we get to the next giant companies started by diverse founders. And, I feel like we have a few in the portfolio that are going to go that way, but that's really the most important thing that's going to come out of this moment from a business context.
Thank you, Ben Horowitz.
All right. Thank you, Ken.
All righty. That closes our Fireside Chat for the day.